everyone. We're going to give everyone a few moments to join us and then we'll get started. Okay, so we're going to get started. I just wanted to say welcome to Let's Talk About Mental Health for All Communities in Conversation. This is the BIPOC panel, BIPOC, which stands for Black, Indigenous People of Color and People of Color. NAMI Mass presents a series of panels that ask the question, what does it mean to truly achieve mental health for all? We have invited diverse panels from the BIPOC and LGBTQ plus communities to discuss issues of stigma, access, inequity, challenges, and healing. Our goal in hosting these panels is twofold. We hope not only to increase public awareness about how diverse communities think about and address mental health, experience specific barriers, contemplate changes needed, promote recovery and healing and building resilience. But we also want to foster conversations about how othering, and we're going to talk about othering, impacts communities and what types of changes need to be advanced to achieve mental health for all. So I want to start out again by thanking you for joining us for tonight's panel. I'm going to introduce myself and the panelists who have joined us this evening. First, I just want to go over a few logistics. We will have an opportunity for the audience, you, Q&A at the end of the webinar event. Please type your questions into the chat at any point in the during the panel discussion. Kyrie Muhammad, a NAMI Mass staff member, will be managing the chat and will collect questions from the audience to ask panelists at the end. If your question fits in, I might throw it in. So just make sure you type it in the chat. We have an ASL interpreter here with us today. As such, we may take pauses at different points during the discussion today to allow the interpreter to catch up. We also, if you notice at the bottom of your screen, we also have auto-generated live captioning turned on for this event. The captioning may have some inaccuracies since it's computer generated, but hopefully it will still be helpful. We kind of found that it's about 90% accurate. So it should be helpful, but it's our attempt to be as diverse and attentive as possible. So let us get started. I will introduce myself. I am Dr. Tonisha Pinckney. I am a humanitarian and social justice activist with mental health parity and awareness, with a mental health parity and awareness focus. I have expertise in criminal and social justice, financial crimes, fraud examination, emergency management, leadership, and of course, justice, diversity, equity, and inclusion. I teach at 3 universities, and I also have a financial forensics and business consulting firm. More important to this event, I am a board member at NAMI Mass, and I am part of the executive committee, and I'm also the chair of the IDEA committee, which stands for Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Awareness. So I am really glad to be here today. I'm really excited about the work that Eliza and the rest of the NAMI team has done for this event. I also want to just let you know that I am a peer. I am diagnosed with bipolar and also depression and PTSD and anxiety and probably a bunch of other stuff if they really looked harder. I've raised 2 children. One has social anxiety disorder and he has a muscular dystrophy, and the other is diagnosed with schizophrenia paranoid type. and anxiety. So mental health as a parent and a peer is something that's really, really important to me. And I just want to add one more thing. Coming out of this a few days ago, I was the victim of a fire where our building burned down. So even the stresses of that have to do with things with this event. So I'm really glad to be here. For our first panelist, we have Whitewolf Freeman. She serves as an advisor and community development specialist to two nonprofits, assisting with grant writing, drafting proposals for joint collaborations, declarations of MOUs, which are memorandums of understanding, as well as sharing the voice of advocacy for the needs of the people. Payani, I'm not sure I pronounced that correctly. She can correct me if I didn't. An organization that supports the empowerment of the Hopi people to embrace the future with hope that our children will be endowed with respect, honoring the path that we walk in our culture, language, healing traditions, and ceremonies. Collectively, we, the organization, seek to build our wealth when we connect with the earth around us, know well our roots and traditions, and are grounded in the cultural heritage that nourishes us. She's also a part of Mavericks Wave Tribes United, an organization that supports programs that bring environmental awareness and conservation practices, specifically with waste management, to reduce pollution on the island of Fiji and the South Pacific. As a spiritual mentor and author of Navigating Our Destiny, a 6-week program of self-discovery, Ian seeks to aid individuals to become reacquainted with their sense of worth, validating within themselves an opportunity for healing while creating resilient space for growth. She is also the author of Sacred Whispers, A Journey of Grace, a book of affirmations published in 2018, and When the Spirits Call, a current work in progress, I guess it's in process too, which shares the story of how she came to the Hopi Nation, embracing grandmother spider. It is wonderful to have you, Ian. Please greet us with a few words.
Hello to everyone, and thank you for inviting me to be a part of this very special occasion. I really am very happy to be a part of it. I think that mental health is a very critical point of what we need to be made aware of in our society. I have lived many years with it, with PTSD, as a sexual assault survivor from when I was a young child. However, I'm the first to advocate that is not what defines me, nor any of us. It's just something that we've been challenged with. So I take this as a very, very good opportunity to be able to express some of the challenges that our communities face. I represent the African American as well as the Indigenous, as my lineage comes from both. Being multiracial, we are faced with many challenges. And certainly on the reservation, they have some of their own unique challenges. So this is a great opportunity to bring that very needed conversation, to bring that awareness as to what it is that we are challenged by and how is it that we can address it to help bring change. So I believe that we are voices for the collective whole, each of us, and that those voices need to be heard. So thank you for the opportunity and allowing us to share that voice.
It is fantastic to have your voice heard. And I'm so glad you're here, because a lot of times when we speak about people of color, I've been to so many panels and the Indigenous peoples are not represented, especially those that are of mixed backgrounds. So I am really excited to hear your input and some of your wisdom and experiences. Next, we have Helina Fontes. I hope I'm saying that right. I'm so bad at this. I'm not bad at this. I'm bad at pronouncing names. She's a career peer specialist, mother, community organizer, candidate for the Massachusetts Governor's Council, District 6, and a program director of a mental health nonprofit located in the Northeast region with offices located in Lynn, Lawrence, Lowell, and Malden. Under her leadership, the Northeast Recovery Learning Community serves individuals impacted by mental health diagnoses, addiction, incarceration, and other traumatic life events, and promotes and supports recovery, which enables the persons served to remain and reintegrate into their communities. In short, she is a superhero. So Helina, we are really glad to have you today. If you can greet us with a few words and kind of tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, thank you, Dr. Tony. I am very, very excited to be here. And in summary of my bio, what I don't think is really stated in there is before any of that, I'm actually a Black woman. I have 2 Black sons. And what put me on this path to begin with was my experience as a mother and watching my child, my oldest baby, my son, cycle in and out of the justice system when he really needed like mental health care. And so circumstances kind of put me on this path. So underneath all of that, when people ask me, what am I? Am I a politician? No, I'm just a mama. I'm just a mama trying to make some change. I'm very happy to be here. Mental health for all is something near and dear to me. So thank you for having me. I look forward to hearing from everyone as well.
Thank you so much. And I, while my children were not justice involved, we've had that experience, had many experiences. So, and I think those that are listening will benefit from hearing about your experiences as well. So next up, we have George Halfkenny. George Halfkenny was put in a jail cell when he was 8 years old. He started using alcohol at 11 and by 14 was deep into cocaine addiction. He spent the next 25 years cycling in and out of treatment centers, prisons, and hospitals. It wasn't until George coupled traditional treatment with mental health counseling that he started to get positive results. Today, George is a trauma survivor and proud to be a person in recovery. He co-founded Thrive Communities, a nonprofit that helps people returning from incarceration. Currently, he is a certified peer specialist and outreach coordinator for Kiva Centers. George, it is a privilege and an honor to have you with us today. I'm offering you the same opportunity to tell us a little bit more about yourself and why you're participating in this panel today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. The main reason why I think I'm participating is because people that have incarceration as part of their story often aren't part of these conversations, but there's so much intersectionality and crossover between, incarceration and mental health, because that's what they're doing with people, like the previous person said, who might need treatment. They're putting them in prisons. So that ended up being my story, and so a lot of that stuff never got dealt with, and when it wasn't, just the cycles of recidivism continued, Plus, I'm really into the Nothing About Us Without Us movement. I feel like for so long, especially as a Black man, we haven't been even considered for these conversations. We had to get the trickle-down treatment from what everybody else got. And everything is not for everybody. So I'm looking to change the conversation around not just cultural competence, but really having people like me, peers, support people who are sharing in this experience. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And you are absolutely right. That's why it's so important to have diverse voices, even on a diversity panel, because every experience is different. Every experience requires different approaches. And it's also good because an approach that might help one culture might help another culture. So it is just, like I said, I am personally proud of you. And so I'm really honored to have you here. All right, the next up we have is Heidi Lee. And oh, I forgot to read your bio. I was so excited to hear, like this panel is just so awesome. Heidi Lee has recently begun her third career as a CPS, certified peer specialist and housing navigator. After founding and sustaining 2 rigorous urban middle and high school art departments for over 12 years. Her second career was as the artist in residence and art director of a homeless program developed to help those seeking to use their artistic talents to sell their art on the streets of Boston. Heidi discovered her passion to work with this population through this program and now works as a housing navigator and peer specialist for Boston Healthcare for the homeless program. She also teaches art independently while raising her highly active 6-year-old. Those of us who have kids understand that. Heidi works in oils, acrylics, mixed media, and dabbles in sculpture and assemblage. COVID has been an opportunity for her to create community Zoom groups where she is able to support other artists seeking accountability and encouragement as a way of coping with isolation. Heidi is a hardcore sweat fanatic. You have to explain to me what that is, who strongly believes that exercise is the best form of anger and stress management. She also enjoys taking long walks with her family, as well as making hearty 5-course Korean meals for others as her primary love language. Food is my love language too. So Heidi, thank you so much for being here and all of the work you do in the various communities you have served in, especially bringing out the creativity when everything else can seem chaotic. So Heidi, tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're on the panel.
So yeah, I guess out of those things, I think that the thing that I'm most proud of is just, yeah, like accomplishing really anything on a, just managing and being resilient through my, bipolar condition. I guess it's more credit to my my partner husband who, it just kind of speaks more of him and how humble and supportive he is than anything that I've achieved. But yeah, and those who struggle, really understand what I mean by that. Yeah, I think that I'm here because I care very deeply about mental health, but I don't know how I put this. I guess if I could say one thing, I'm here for my friend Esther, who's been on my mind lately. She's, also, Asian American, Korean American. And yeah, I think that if the mental health system in this country served her well, then she would still be here. And so I think that there's a lot of stigma, as is for mental health, and even more so in the BIPOC community, the Asian American community. We just don't choose to talk about it. And so that's why I'm here, because I want to talk about it.
Thank you. That's where our cultures share that commonality as far as stigma is concerned, and kind of telling people that it's okay not to be okay, and that we need to talk about it so that we can be okay. So thank you so much again for being with us today. Now we have Mr. Robert Ortiz. He has defined his journey and long-term recovery from having a mental health and substance use condition by exploring his passion to help others achieve their goals. As a person who can relate to many experiences, he strives to develop genuine relationships between professionals and the recipients of their services. He strongly believes that everyone has the ability to improve their lives with access to the right supports. Robert currently serves as the Northeast Director of Peer Recovery Services at Fellowship Health Resources, FHR, a multi-state organization providing behavioral health services. In this role, he's responsible for assisting FHR in establishing evidence-based peer services and creating and cultivating a peer recovery-oriented environment through training and support. He also oversees the organization's Community Peer Connections program, a peer-driven volunteer program that matches a volunteer with an individual from the community seeking support and championship. Prior to this position, Robert acted as certified peer specialist and clubhouse coordinator. He is a Massachusetts certified peer specialist, a Rhode Island certified peer recovery specialist, an international peer recovery specialist, and recovery coach. Robert is a skilled trainer with experience in facilitating WHM, WHAM, Whole Health Action Management, and RAP, Wellness Recovery Action Planning. In 2017, he was recognized by the National Council of Behavioral Health as a Peer Support Specialist of the Year. Robert, you have the lived experience, the education, and the wherewithal to do all of this. It's a privilege to have you here also. Tell us a little bit about yourself and why you chose to join the panel.
Well, thank you, Tony. It gives me goosebumps the way you introduced me. It was so eloquent. Well, let me tell you about a young child who grew up in a very dysfunctional home. Their parent was Spanish speaking, and when they spoke English, it was very broken. And in the midst of the chaos, this young child would be the one to kind of counsel them, with hopes to be able to help them build some common ground. This child was also the interpreter because the parents didn't know how to read documents, nor did they go out looking for the help that they so needed. Years go on with the distress in the household where there were multiple cases where this parent attempted suicide, and it went unaddressed for years. Until eventually, in 1999, the parent took their life because of not having adequate access to care, or the care didn't go seeking this parent. I'm that child. And since then, I developed the passion to really help people because I really confidently believe that it takes one person to really create a change in someone's life in order to help them, to get them to where they would want to be. I've worked as a certified peer specialist. I work also as an instructor, and I see this in many of the people that I see in these trainings, as well as in my walk of life. So I look at it as if my mom had an opportunity to meet any one of the people that are on this panel, or anyone who has lived experience, that my mom would possibly be alive. The thing is about our culture, because we come from a Hispanic heritage, is we live in a world of secrets. We don't tell anybody what's going on. Nonetheless, seek help from somebody because it would make us feel as if though we're dependent on others, when it becomes intrusive on us wanting to be independent. So that's really where my passion lies, is from that. I like seeing people achieve what it is that they want most in life, but more so, it's more than just skin color. It really is. Everyone should get the adequate level of help that they need. It shouldn't be based upon who's Black, who's Spanish. You know, it really comes down to a deep cultural rooted element. But that's why I'm here, is to hopefully educate the attendees and why mental health for all is important.
Thank you so much, Robert. You, first of all, I'm sorry you had to endure that. And I'm so glad you came through it to become the person that you are, regardless of your race, gender, sexuality, religion. It takes a strong person to go through all of that. And then even if this was the only thing you did was speak on this panel today, just to do that, it would take a very strong individual. So thank you so much. And now we have Jasmine Quinones. She has been with the Kiva Centers for 5 years, building solid working relationships throughout Massachusetts and serving as the consummate Goodwill Ambassador for our Kiva Centers. Jasmine is a Massachusetts certified peer specialist, certified RAP, which is again, Wellness Recovery Action Plan, and TIPS, trauma-informed peer support instructor, and has completed IPS, Hearing Voices Network, Alternatives to Suicide, and Children and Family Advocacy Training. Jasmine received the Angel Award in the South County CHNA area 2 years in a row for excellence in community collaboration. She has been recognized by the Salvation Army for her collaborative community work in South County, as well as being awarded as an unsung hero of the Salvation Army's disaster relief team. Excuse me. I'll tell you why that choked me up in a second. One of Jasmine's greatest professional achievements was the honor to work alongside ASS MCA, Puerto Rico's Department of Mental Health on the island, bringing the Kiva Center's model of trauma-informed peer support to their population in need. Because of Jasmine's coaching and dedication to the cause, Puerto Rico will soon be opening peer-run centers inspired by the Kiva Center's model throughout many areas of Puerto Rico. Outside of work, Jasmine is the mother of 2 wonderful children who she loves to dote on. The beach is her happy place where she goes to recharge her soul. Jasmine, thank you so much for being here. What kind of hit me was your award from the Salvation Army's disaster relief, because I'm working with the Salvation Army right now in my situation, and they are just amazing, and everybody that works there is amazing. So for you to be awarded and to stand out above everyone else as an unsung hero really shows how amazing you are. Jasmine, tell us a little bit about yourself and your wonderful children, if you wish, and why you're on the panel today.
Thank you. I'm really honored and very humbled to be on this panel right now. I'm actually in Puerto Rico providing technical support assistance to their Department of Mental Health, where my colleague Juan is somewhere in the audience watching me. We're bringing peer support services to unserviced communities. So I'm not back home, but I'm definitely still connected to the cause. I think one of the things that really strikes out for me is that when we talk about underserviced communities, we only think about, sometimes Black or white, sometimes, other cultures don't come into the mix, other people who are struggling just as much, deaf and hard of hearing, visually impaired, other things that people are struggling with. So I'm definitely excited to be part of this panel. I'm definitely very honored to be part of this panel, and I'm hoping to be a voice, not just as a Latino woman, a woman of color that has been struggling, alongside some of the with a lot of mental health challenges and trying to bring certain things to our community, but as a single mother of 2 children, so all kinds of biases being thrown at me for sure. So I'm definitely humbled and honored to be here, and thank you.
Thank you for saying all of that, because one thing that when we talk about the BIPOC community, sometimes we overlook the intersectionality. We're just not people of color experiencing mental health challenges. We're people of color that experience all challenges and mental health challenges and the impacts of race or ethnicity or cultural stigma. So it's an additional layer. It doesn't hide the other things that we go through. So it's so important that we talk about, some of these challenges. So I guess we will jump right in to some of the questions here, and, just kind of talk about a little bit of, if my thing is working. If not, I have to make something up. Y'all don't want me to do that. Oh, okay. Sorry about that. I am, okay. Sorry. All right. So our first question, because I have to stick to the script, because if not, I act up and then I don't want them to kick me off. How does culture and identity influence how your community approaches mental health? What impact, if any, do you think your culture and identity have on how you approach your own mental health? For this, I would like to start with our first panelist, who was Lyan. If you can take that question, I'll repeat it. And then as Lyan finishes, we can just continue from there and you can jump in. Again, it says, how does culture and identity influence how your community approaches mental health? And what impact, if any, do you think your culture and identity have on how you approach your own mental health?
Well, thank you. Thank you for the question. I'm listening, and I believe that there are many things that cross-culturally we all face. You mentioned a very important part. It's not just by how we identify. We're individuals that face many challenges, and we can often be bombarded with these challenges throughout our lives. I, as I said, come from a variety of communities, but I'm going to focus really right now on terms of the African American and Indigenous. And I believe that stigma is one of the most critical things which is a hindrance. I don't think that many communities, and bear with me, I was introduced to peer mentoring through the Georgia Mental Health Consumer Network. And I was offered an opportunity of insight as to what recovery could really mean. At no point in my cultural background could I identify with that being introduced to me. If anything, there was always a stigma attached that, it was a bad thing. It was not a good thing. And the conversations were often, as the gentleman Robert said, kept in secret. There was a lot of shame associated with mental health. I always thought growing up that my mother, because my mother had always told me that she hated me, was because of the fact that because I had been raped at 3.5, I was no longer pure. That's why my mother didn't like me. And so there was a lot of challenges. and lack of awareness, no one really being able to help you when you're thrown into a hospital at 8 years old in the psychiatric ward. So I think culturally we've been failed in terms of the system that was made or provided for us. And only through, I believe, the movement of the peer specialist movement is there really a paradigm shift in how mental health is looked at. And mental health is just as much a part of how we are made up as our physical health. We are made up of body, mind, and spirit. And culturally, in the indigenous culture, certainly, that's one of the things in which we are taught, that we are made up of the three. But sometimes an element of what happens in our mind is ignored. And the challenges and the trauma that we may face, we don't always understand. There are some things that can hit us from a point of long-term oppression that we've had to endure.
Thank you, Ian. I'm not
The
sure.
trauma of not feeling by, and I guess we'll get into that when we speak about othering, but how others perceive us, and then how we perceive ourselves. And we lack that sense of self-worth. We lack that sense of identity of where we belong. So in this conversation, in this bringing awareness, I think that oh, everybody flipped out for a moment.
Okay, we heard at the end you were breaking up a bit, but thank you so much. If we can
you hear me?
We can. It's a little bit better, but maybe before we get to the next question, if you can maybe sign out and sign back in, or possibly check your connection or something like that. You're clear a lot of the times, but sometimes you break up. So, but we did hear what you had to say for the most part. Let's go to Helina. If you can please answer the same question, and if you need me to repeat it, let me know, but if you can answer the same question.
Yeah, would you mind repeating it? That would be helpful. That way I'm answering it correctly.
Sure. How does culture and identity influence how your community approaches mental health? What impact, if any, do you think your culture and identity have on how you approach your own mental health?
Yeah, so that's like a really loaded question. I'm going to start with, I feel like for centuries, for a plethora of reasons that I think we'll address more adequately in the next question, when we get to barriers, women of color, Black women, women of many different cultural backgrounds, we're carrying so much, and there's a strength, like it's almost like we are carrying our ancestors, we are fighting through inequities and inequalities of all kinds related to healthcare, mental health care, wealth, employment, the social justice system. And so there is no time to be struggling. And for me, I found that coming up, that was always the messaging, like, girl, you all right. You all right. You're going to be okay. And even today, like when there was, not today specifically, but I find that at this point in my life, I still really wrestle with that. Like, I don't take self-inventory because we're trying to play catch up in so many other arenas of life, that I feel like I have to be very intentional about checking in on my own mental health and addressing and being honest with myself and not feeling like a sense of shame or guilt for needing time for myself. So I think for a lot of women of color, specifically Black women, we are walking around with chronic stress, and we have so many areas and domains of life that, you know, we're trying to get, you know, ahead of the curve on, as I mentioned. And we tell ourselves we're strong, but that strength really wears on us. And so some of that strength is actually hypervigilance. We're so self-protective because we've had to be. And so, yeah, for me, it's always, I have benefited from the strength, like some of the, like how the resiliency in our community and how we've been able to, and despite oppression and racism and so many different like areas of marginalization, like how we're still here and functioning and moving forward. And I celebrate that because that is a strength that I have received and I have inherited. Yet I also recognize my vulnerability as a human being, and that I too myself have challenges and have things that I don't so closely identify with my mental health. And I think, again, that's a lot to do with me, like, just focused on and being on the defense from so many other things.
Thank you so much. There's a lot that I can identify with. Before we jump to Robert, I have gotten to the point where the word strong almost feels like a curse word, you know, because you hear it so, oh, you're resilient, you're strong, you're resilient, you're strong. And I find in my culture as a Black woman, that sometimes that's said not really for our benefit, but to make others feel better with what we're going through. You handled all of this, you can handle this too. In other words, it's okay, I don't have to do anything because you're a strong Black woman, but we're the mother of Black sons that are experiencing injustices and Black daughters that are trying to rise up in the world despite gender and race, gender and racism. And we're kind of almost like a matriarchal culture at this point because so many of the men and fathers and those that play those roles have been imprisoned over the years. So there's a missing generation there that the weight of the Black woman, we carry that. And so what do? Similar to what I did a couple of years ago, I had a great therapist, loved her. My son needed therapy. So what did I do? I invited him to use her. So what happened? I lost my therapist because then it was, oh, well, I can't, it's going to interfere. I don't feel comfortable. He doesn't feel comfortable. So I backed away from therapy because she was such a good therapist and it would help my son. So that is something that we do sometimes. We pull back so that we can be the strength for others. So I can definitely identify that, especially when my kids were younger. Robert, I put the question in the box. So if you want to answer that as well.
I seen the box and I want to be respectful that there were two others before me in the order. So I didn't know if that was intentional.
I don't have the order in front of me, so I was just calling it a
okay.
Screen.
if Heidi and George don't mind, would you mind if I answer the question? All right, thank you. So for me, when I look at the way that culture and identity influence how our community approaches mental health, like it reminds me of a time when I was confronted by the police. I present white, but my reaction or my behavior with them at the time was irrational. I'll take ownership for my behavior. However, when I was processed and giving the way that I present myself with ink on my forearms and then my last name being Ortiz, I was actually profiled as a gang member. I was actually profiled as a Latin King gang member. Especially after so many run-ins with the authorities, it wasn't as though that they said, hey, you need some help. But I guess that comes down to really an unaddressed issue from when I was younger. You know, in the city that I live in, at the time, it was predominantly Portuguese, Cape Verdeans, and some Puerto Ricans. And my heritage is Puerto Rican and Cuban. At the time, there weren't many resources available. I've seen things change within the past 2 decades where much more Central Americans have moved into the same community in which I used to live in. And having grown up as a child who lived in a very dysfunctional home, I was raised by a single mom. I was absent of a father figure, or of a biological father figure. Having really to be like the caretaker of the home, the mediator, it was really hard. The way that I see it's like, we're on Section 8, we live in subsidized housing. They don't take into consideration education level from the culture groups that are being represented, especially within the community. My mom had a 9th grade education, hence why she didn't understand like big terminology or anything that was on the application. She really needed somebody who could empathize with her and really explain to her what the questions were asking in regards to care. Even in my mom's attempts, I don't think anybody really empathized to address the mental health concern, you know, which later on I adopted. You know, I adopted it by disassociating. So it was almost like, and I like what Ian had mentioned was, you know, living a life full of secrets. My mom didn't want help. She wasn't going to seek the help herself, but it gives me the impression that we as professionals need to be mindful of outreaching people who have recidivism, you know, of either multiple hospitalizations, whether if it's due to suicidality or if it's due to, you know, some form of mental health component. So I don't want to go too off track, but I think the Hispanic community really hasn't set a foothold to really address the needs of the Hispanic community. It's more so in the hands of those that are English speaking and how they really navigate the systems of care. I mean, if you really think about it, in my organization alone, even though we really want diversity, we want to have, you know, a mixed culture of people, the majority speak English. If it wasn't for that local multicultural community day program that I know of, a lot of our persons who receive services would be without. So, I mean, it's tough because for the most time, I find myself still interpreting, much as I did when I was a youth. So I think with me, I try to encourage friends, families, those that I know that are of color, whether if they're from Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, Central America, you know, that there are positions available, but then I think it comes down to a point of education, right? My mom would have made a great certified peer specialist. She loved people. She did. The fact that she didn't receive the same kind of love, I think, is what really pushed her to take her own life. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that if a person had been given the opportunity to be able to be successful in their recovery or in their mental health or in their substance use addiction, it starts with understanding the whole person. It's more than just the diagnoses. It's more than just the substance use, because mental health really takes on what we experienced from childhood all the way up into our adult life. That really takes part of culture. But again, that's my opinion. That's how I feel. That drives my passion. So thank you, Tony.
Thank you. I believe Heidi is, no, I'm sorry, George is next. I do ask the panelists, we have so many stories to share. If we can try to keep it, because we're looking at the time, we have about 20 more minutes. So after this question, we really need to hear all of your experiences as they have been told, but after this one, if you can keep it to about 2 minutes for the following. But this question, we need to hear what you've experienced and what you had to say. George? You're muted, George.
Oh, snap. Okay, you got, all right. All right. My community's culture and identity influences mental health in a way that it wasn't even a thing. Like, it wasn't something that was real. It wasn't something that was talked about. If you did have something like that, it had to be so over the top before anybody would even accept that it was mental health. People used to say, we got too many other problems to be dealing with mental health too. So you better figure that out. Just get it together. It was seen as a sign of weakness. Also, if you did have some kind of issues. My personal issues came out of trauma and abuse. So there was like the double stigma of not wanting to have to unpack why I'm having these issues to everybody, which made it even more impossible. As far as how it impacts my own mental health, my approach, I mean, I was almost 40 years old before I started really dealing with it and talking about it in any real way. So I think it impacted me for a long, long time in that I had every other issue maybe, but just not that, anything but that. So that was the impact.
Thank
Thank you.
you. Heidi?
Yeah, so it's so hard to unpack, but I will share that a big part of I'll share from my personal Korean American experience as not quite second, but 1.5 generation, having come here at age 6, is that yeah, mental health is definitely, like, as I mentioned, just something that we really struggle with, because family honor is a big thing in most Asian American families, communities. And so when you are struggling with something, when you're not bringing honor to your family, it's not just about you, it's very much about disgracing your family name, and definitely the integrity of the parents who raised you. So yeah, I think that when I was my first major hospitalization in 2010 was really big, because it was finally like the point where my parents had to face the reality of my condition. They knew that things were just not quite right. Maybe, 3 suicide attempts during high school, just lots of very, very unusual behaviors, and anorexia during high school, just having heart conditions because of it, just really things that just were a little off. And I think that my hospitalization in my late 20s finally forced them to come to the realization that they had to confront that their daughter struggled with mental health issues. And even then, I think my father went over to my husband that day they came, and pretty much said, "What did you do to my daughter? This is your fault." And so they had a fist fight in inpatient hospital unit, because it's just this blaming game, and I think that there's just a very unhealthy culture of like how we accept the things that it just are difficult. And the way that I approach things now, I think that I had to just actually cut my family off so that I can get healthy, so that I can work on my own mental health. because they were not really quite catching up to where I was at in regards to advocating for mental health, and also just understanding my own condition and how to manage it. So, I speak to them now, but basically, yeah, I think that drawing boundaries and all these things that were necessary. I'll just stop there. But basically, that there are just a whole lot of unhealthy perspectives in the Asian American community that I think is, drastically improving, but there's quite a bit of work still to be done.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And thank you for sharing your personal story as well. Jasmine, did we give you an opportunity?
I'll be brief. Just like Heidi, coming from, a Puerto Rican and Italian background, we also struggle with not being able to share a lot about our mental health. It's kind of, I always call it the kitchen table conversation, like whatever, like I said, in the kitchen table, it goes no further than that. And it's really been a struggle, to be a person that is working in the mental health field, and, the reciprocation that I've gotten from my family as to, oh, she's just snooping, she's just trying to do this, that, and third. And it's really just time to change the language around mental health, and culturally, especially. I mean, there's so many barriers that, like Juan and I, even a colleague of mine that we're working with in Puerto Rico, see even in Puerto Rico, like we're just not, with the times, we really just don't want to be. It's almost like, like we're stuck in a time warp, and it's really time. And I think the time is now to really start changing these conversations culturally, personally, for our communities, stop putting accepting less than what we deserve, and stop normalizing that it's just because we're Puerto Rican or because we're of this culture that, we've created a society where we've normalized a lot of things, and it's not normal, and it's really hindered the growth and process of a lot of people and communities. So short, almost.
Short but powerful. That leads us, actually, your comment leads us directly to the next question. What internal barriers, beliefs, experiences, etc., and external barriers, social conditions, structural issues, lack of access, etc., exist for you or members of your community that hinder help seeking and access to healthcare? I do want to kind of answer this a little bit. Some of the barriers, I was raised a PK, which is a preacher's kid. Grandparents, ministers, parents, just everybody but me. And it was interesting that I grew up, I was sexually assaulted 4 times, 4 separate occasions, and I went through 8 years of domestic violence while I was married, not to mention before I got married, and all of the things that I went through. And then when I had a son who had mental health challenges starting at age 6, what I got was, you got to pray the demon away. And I thought people only said that in the dark ages. I didn't realize that this is still a thing today. And so I actually went to one particular group, and they told me, church group, and they told me, yeah, it's what you and your son are eating that's causing this. Now, I've since learned that it's not all churches, it's not all religions, it's certain ones that hold these antiquated beliefs. But for me, the barrier was feeling like my challenges were a challenge to my faith. That it was because I didn't have enough faith. It was because I was weak. It was because of me, rather than I had been through some stuff in life, and it affected me. So that was one of the barriers that I faced, on top of other things. Internal barriers, that was, I guess, my internal barriers were my belief system. But externally, it was, if it was not the immediate thought as a Black child, a woman, or even as a parent of Black sons, that it was a mental health condition. It was always thought to be behavioral. So when I didn't realize I was going through depression, and what I was told was, you're rebelling. You're rebelling against, so, the unofficial kind of ODD, oppositional defiant disorder. And it was, no, I don't have an attitude. I just got sexually assaulted and I'm experiencing PTSD and depression. So a lot of it wasn't the understanding that mental health help was available, and even at times turned down because that was a white thing to do. White people talk about their feelings, Black people handle their feelings. So those were some of the barriers that even impacted access to care and helping. Again, we have, if we can go to, I'm just going to call on someone. George, well, I'm going to let you start with this. If we can keep it short, I'm being reminded that we don't have a lot of time. And we can answer some of these in the Q&A as well. George, what are some of the barriers that you've experienced?
Yeah, pretty much like I said to the first question, it slides into this, like the internal barriers where the messages that I was told over and over about, not having the luxury of having a mental illness, that my abuse was going to go unspoken, that, that just wasn't something that men dealt with, especially Black men. The community barriers were that, there were very few people that I felt comfortable enough to reach out to and really talk about it, you know what I mean, outside of recovery spaces, right? So I had to already be in it, and I wasn't in no recovery spaces for years. So, it just went unspoken, and I didn't want to be seen as the person coming out the clinic or going to the mental health clinic or whatever. I just, because then I would have to own everything else too. And that was just too much with everything else that was going on in real time. So we'll leave that. What's in the past is in the past. And that's how I manage it. I feel like things are changing. I don't know if it's because we're starting to really get to the raw of what's going on in our communities, but I'm starting to have more conversations with Black men that talk about trauma, that talk about, really hurting, that talk about needing some help and not really understanding things. So I'm definitely encouraged. But for me coming up, that's how it was. Now I feel like we're starting to bust through those doors a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you. Helina? I'm not calling in order for time, so just if I call your name, it's your time. Helina?
I'm muted. And just for the sake of time, I'm just basically gonna piggyback off of, from within. It's really the narrative of you gotta be strong. We've got to play catch up. There's no time to, to stop that hustle grind culture. That's definitely internal. And then I think externally, I won't really expound as I would have. There's a lot of distrust, rightfully, with the mental health system, specifically the Black communities, lower income Black communities, because I don't want to presume that all Black people share the same beliefs, but in lower income communities, there's definitely a distrust there. In addition, there is a lack of providers. You go and call up a therapist, you're going to have a very difficult time finding someone who looks like you. And attorneys know representation matters, and you want someone who understands you culturally, someone you feel comfortable and safe with. And so there's a lack of culturally representative therapists and clinicians, et cetera. insurance and in healthcare. We know there's healthcare disparities. I was reading a study where they did a study of like African Americans, Black women specifically going to the hospital and others. Like, so we give ourselves the narrative of strength, but then doctors dismissing like early onset of certain health diseases because we're complaining they can't find anything. So our like health symptoms and especially our mental health care, it goes unaddressed, untreated. So those are just a few off the top of my head, and I'll stop there.
Thank you. That was so important. For instance, and Jasmine, you can go next, and then Heidi, and then George, and then Robert. I have lupus, and they don't tell you that lupus brings on depression and can make your depression worse. So there is a definite, those that have cancer, there is a definite connection to physical health and mental health and vice versa that we need to be attentive to for holistic care. Jasmine?
Oh, we have something in common, Dr. Tony. I have systemic lupus, so I know I can definitely relate. But one of the things, I live in a very highly populated Latino community, but I'm still asking for things to be translated, and I just don't feel like that should be the case. I mean, if we know what the demographics are, if the statistics have already been done, and we know that we have a certain type of community, then we should definitely be prioritizing that. I shouldn't have to ask for things, to be already translated, because we already know that our community is highly populated, with different languages. So I feel that, a lot of my community and myself, it looks at it as a barrier because we're not going to receive the same type of equality in services, because we have to ask for more all the time. We have to feel like we're a burden to somebody because we don't understand, because English is not our first language, or, because like others were saying, we don't have the proper representation. We have to, do translation through tablets and then, and other forms that can be, a little bit discouraging. They don't work appropriately, so I'll keep it short. But yeah, definitely barriers in places where there shouldn't be barriers, because we already know what the numbers say. We already know what our communities are saying, and we shouldn't be asking, for any. We're just trying to create equal access for everybody. So
before we continue to Heidi, I just want to take a break and thank our ASL interpreters, Steph and Mike, I believe it is. Hope I got that name right. Thank you so much. We didn't say your names, but I wanted to make sure your names are there and said. So thank you so much for what you're doing. Heidi?
I'll try to be super quick and just mention that, I think that for the, I'll say for myself, but a lot of my Asian American friends, the model minority myth definitely doesn't serve our community. It's really hard to seek help when others are telling you that you don't need it. One example is that I tried to start an Asian Parents Affinity group at my son's school this year, being that there's been about 1900% rise in aggression and attacks towards Asian Americans in this country in the past year. And that's kind of a lowballing, but, basically I felt the need and I brought it to the DEI person at, his school. And she said, "Oh, is one necessary?" And I was kind of like, well, yeah, I feel like I need it. And she said, I was told by other parents, another Asian parent, that, there is no need for an Asian parent affinity group. And so, yeah, I think that there's this kind of misconception that, it's, you're the successful BIPOC group, you shouldn't have any issues. And so it's really hard to seek help. And even for ourselves to even, the high suicide rates, especially amongst college students, amongst Asian Americans, it's really something that's becoming such a problem. I'll just stop there.
Thank you for that. That also goes to the let's find one person who supports our thoughts on the issue from that culture and attribute it all to the whole culture. So, that person that is Korean who says, no, we don't need this. So we're going to believe that the whole Asian community doesn't need it. So, kind of, picking one person for a community and speaking for the whole. I think I said George next.
I'm sorry, we on question 3?
Question 2, what are some of the barriers that you
Yeah,
face?
I already answered this question.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry,
That's
Robert.
okay.
So I also will try to be brief. I would say within my culture, it would be pride. Pride is definitely plays a big part where we don't need help. And if we were to ask for help, we'd be indebted to someone. I believe religion definitely plays a role as well. Whether you're a PK or you're a Roman Catholic that grew up in that faith, it's what I grew up in. Some external barriers that we faced. I would say being in a community that spoke similar languages, such as Cape Verdean and Portuguese, doesn't necessarily mean that it's the same language. Language is just language. However, if you can't emotionally connect with somebody, it does a disservice to be able to help someone. I remember helping a peer whose case manager was Portuguese, and she felt as if though she understood the individual, and I had to advocate with that person for them just to live independently. And it was very difficult because as an external barrier, I mean, we got to be able to connect with people and understanding the culture as a whole again. But, I myself present as a white Hispanic. I look more American and white than I do Hispanic. So it's really tough for me to kind of like fit into both categories. Yo hablo español muy buenos, especially when I talk to like my own peers. So I speak Spanish very well, especially with my peers, if I'm going to have a dialogue with them and that emotion surfaces itself. I have barriers towards people who speak English who don't leave room for that.
Yeah, thank you for that. And that's something else that's very multicultural in nature when someone is a multicultural individual dealing with the stigma in both communities, almost feeling like I've been told not being in either community sometimes because one doesn't want to accept you because you're not completely of that culture. So thank you for that. Ian?
Thank you. I really am just so amazed by all of the stories from all of you. And I'd like to just share, and I'm going to keep this brief, but the commonality, even though we are a diverse panel, is really quite amazing. I share lupus as well with the other two ladies. And that is often a disease that most people don't identify with in terms of what it costs you, in terms of energy, in terms of the cognitive ability of your mind, in terms of your emotions. It is an all-inclusive disease that truly can rob you of everything if you allow it to, but you still cannot be identified or defined by it because you don't introduce yourself, hello, my name is lupus.
Yeah.
And you with Helina, I identify with you because I also have a Black son that is incarcerated who lives with mental illness and should have been in the hospital as opposed to given a life sentence. So I can relate with you and can identify with your pain. And with you, Robert, I can identify because the whole health is an important aspect of who we are. And if we, in any of that imbalance, it creates just that, an imbalance. And we have to look, if we're struggling, as Helena said, if we're struggling to eat and feed our children, as Heidi well knows, just to put a roof over our heads, it's very hard to address not just the everyday things, but the impact of what that increased trauma has created. And often it goes ignored because we are just trying to keep up. We're just trying to keep place and hold ourselves above water that we don't drown. And oftentimes when we go to those professionals in the mental health arena, they don't even believe us. How can you have gone through so much? Well, resilience is a hell of a thing. You should study it sometime. It's in your field to know. But those intangibles, those things that we can't touch, is what touches us and gives us that ability to make it day by day when otherwise we don't even know how we did it. And it's not that we want accolades for it. We just want to be able to survive and provide so that we can thrive in equity as anybody else. That's all I have to say.
I think we're done here. No, that was, you just summed up like my daily message kind of trying to motivate myself, our weaknesses that other people see are our strengths, like our cultural challenges empowered us. It's in our blood. It's who we are. We can fight this, and we shouldn't be penalized or defined by how well we survive. Or when we want to break for a second, like just for a second, let me just be a person. Let me just be regular. So thank you so much for that. Our next question, I'm going to kind of combine some things. And what you said, Ian, really leads into it. Kind of what are our cultures doing right to support our mental health and to support our strength and courage? After this question, if you can answer this really briefly, because we are supposed to talk about othering and other stuff, but I think it kind of we got to the crux of those things in our other. But I do want to talk about really quickly what our culture is doing correctly, and then we're going to get to the Q&A. So if someone can you don't have to give a paragraph, just a couple words on what you feel as though our culture is doing right. And if we can start with Robert, we'll start with you. And
just to be super brief, I would say that many of organizations and providers are trying. They're trying. I think we that represent the community and the cultures in which we live in just need to step up and take it by the reins. But there are organizations that are trying, whether if it's diversity, equity, cultural linguistics, that they're trying. I think it takes people like us to step into those roles and make it more accessible to our communities.
thank you. George?
Yeah, I would say that times are changing and people's attitudes towards mental health is changing in our communities. We're starting to see more providers of color. We're starting to see more communities talk about it in community settings and embrace rather than shun or shame, and sort of like an overall acceptance that this is a thing. And we can't act like it's not anymore. So I'm encouraged by that.
Thank you. Heidi?
So yeah, we're still on number 3, right? Okay, so yeah, I think that something that we are doing well is some of the work that I'm doing with the Asian American Mental Health Forum. Yeah, it's pretty much like you get together 3 dozen type A personalities who are super high achievers and see what you can do. Yeah, I think that there's just this kind of collectiveness. There's something good about this kind of conformist, mentality too. And I think that those who are really activists and advocates for mental health who are in the Asian American community really know how to get it done. And so I feel just going from thinking theory, and then into action is something that I think a lot of my Asian American peers are very good at, is just making it happen, because it is a life or death issue for many of us. I think that we've seen too many friends and family members go because they didn't see any other options. And so, just want to make it something that is available to everyone, whether you look like you need help or not.
Sorry about that, everyone. My my computer, so I'm sorry. Can everyone hear me? Okay. Jasmine, if you can go next.
Yeah, some of the things that my community is doing right is definitely not staying sitting, advocating for themselves, pushing the envelope every day for fair accessibility to services. I live in a very underserviced community, very rural, and we're pushing, and every day we're fighting, to fight, and we're all getting together collectively as Latinos and as women of color to say, hey, this is not something that, we demand, something that we deserve, and accessibility and fairness to all is, what we're looking for. It doesn't matter what the culture is. We're just, looking for everything to be, the same and transparent across the board. So.
Thank you. I think who do we have next? I've lost my list here. Did Heidi answer? I mean, no, Heidi. I'm sorry, I lost my list, so I know I'm missing someone. If you could just jump in. I think it's Helina.
Quickly, what I see being done right is, starting to push back on the narrative and unpack, again, this layer of self-protection and the stress, the chronic stress that is killing us, and stopping and realizing we don't have to be strong. It's okay to struggle and have a challenge, and unpacking that and dealing with that and looking to deal with that and having those conversations. On the opposite side, I also see a lot of organizing and mobilizing, unlike ever before, getting involved, trying to make positive, meaningful change. I see that happening this year. I mean, it's probably been happening and building up for a while, but I really see it this year. Beyond just demanding, we want healthcare and equity. My ballot in Lynn is like a colorful rainbow of candidates from all different diversities, because we got to be at those tables in more than just an advocacy capacity. So I see that happening too, and that's a beautiful thing. I'm inspired and uplifted by that. So yeah, those are the things that are happening and are done well.
Terrific. Thank you, everyone.
I didn't answer, and I'd like to answer.
I'm so sorry.
That's okay. One of the things in which is very important to make that change is to take action. And one of the things that's happening on the reservation, because I don't know if people are familiar, but the Hopi Nation is surrounded by the Navajo Nation that is then surrounded by America. And they often have to go 50 to 100 miles just to a grocery store, an hour and a half just to a laundromat, because many of the homes don't have running water. So one of the things that Pa'ani is trying to do, which means to help, is to bring in some of that necessary infrastructure for the people, not the roads and those things, but the empowerment of the people, because that's how we can affect change and remove some of those things that are creating some of that trauma. When you don't have electricity, when you don't have running water, when you can't have food security. So removing some of those barriers removes some of the trauma that the people are experiencing and gives them a better foothold to be able to take self-determined steps to live their lives in a better capacity.
So thank you. And I'm so glad you didn't let me skip over you. I just have one sentence to add to that. And that's, I find that in the African American culture, it's now easier to name what you're experiencing. Everybody might not understand the mental health aspect of it, but it's easier to say, I had a bad day, I'm struggling, I'm grieving, I'm feeling a little depressed today. So just to have easier conversations, I think, is a benefit or a change. Kyrie, our resident person keeping us straight, is going to have, I believe there's a question from the group.
So great conversation, you guys. Unfortunately, we only have time for one question. And that question is, how can we as people of color approach mental health and the stigma associated with it as one voice? Too often I find we don't recognize each other on a basic human level.
So I'll let 3 people answer this. We don't have time for everybody to answer. I saw Robert's thumb, so if Robert can answer it, and then if we can have 2 others, that would be great.
I think an opportunity to create a forum like this in the communities in which we're representing, I think the level of diversity that we each brings an abundance of knowledge. It's almost like a mini coalition of civil rights for all. So I think keeping it to its basic human level is reminding each other that we are human. We all have worth. We all have value, but we have an abundance of an experience that we can share with one another to make us that much stronger of a people.
Thank you. Who else would like to chime in on that? Just unmute yourself. Ian?
I would just like to add with what Robert said, because it's in our commonality. We are all of one, and it is understanding that we are responsible for each other. What happens to you happens to me. What happens to me happens to you, anywhere in the world. A baby cries, we know that we need to address its needs. And I think we forget that we forget our commonality. Yes, there's the beauty in our diversity, but there is inclusion in our commonality. And I think that needs to be our focus. We're not separate. We are one.
Right. Absolutely. Anyone else want to jump in? Well, I'll say that one of the things that I think we can do to have a single voice is to have all of the voices at the table, including our white counterparts. Panels like this are very necessary, but we also need panels where all groups are included so that we can compare and contrast and create a real plan for equity and parity in mental health, and really do truly have one voice, because what we're doing right now is having a voice for each community, and the only people listening are the people in that community. So we do need to come together and sit at the table together and commit to not leaving that table, so to speak, until all voices are heard and all problems are addressed in some way. Is there another question? If not, we can close out. Okay, so yes, I don't have my notes, so sorry. But I just want to thank everyone for participating and joining us today. Our second panel is tomorrow at 7 p.m., where we'll be talking about the diversity within the LGBTQ plus community and the specific challenges and needs of that community. And again, we're going to talk about intersectionality and the overlap. Oh, I'm sorry, Thursday, not tomorrow. I have to know what today is to know what tomorrow is. So Thursday. The other thing I would like to say is thank you so much for joining. Don't forget our walk that is coming up. We need you, because in order to continue to do this work, we need you to participate. The walk is not just about fundraising, it's about awareness. It's about having our voices heard. It's about unity. It's about all types of inclusion. So please, if you don't know about it, please go to the NAMI Mass website and you can find more information, or it's also likely, if you're a member, it's been emailed to you. So please keep that in mind. I just want to thank all of our panelists, all of our attendees, the NAMI Mass staff. I cannot tell you as a board member how proud I am of you, especially Eliza Williamson and Kyrie and who else is on? There's somebody else. All of you, I'm sorry, but I just am so proud of you for putting this together so thoroughly and so quickly. And that's all I have. And my dog, oh, Michelle, how can I forget Michelle? Oh my goodness. Michelle hugs, I'm so sorry. So please keep all of this in mind. Hopefully you found this helpful.